On October 17, 1989, the San Francisco Bay Area was rocked by one of the most destructive earthquakes in American history. It was an event that would forever change the way people thought about the power of nature and its ability to strike without warning. The earthquake, known as the Loma Prieta earthquake, had a magnitude of 6.9 and caused over $6 billion in damage. It left a deep scar on the region and triggered a wave of changes that would shape the future of earthquake preparedness and urban infrastructure in the United States. The Loma Prieta earthquake struck in the late afternoon at precisely 5:35 p.m., just as many people were heading home from work. It was during this rush hour when the earthquake's timing would prove to be especially devastating. The shaking lasted only 15 seconds, but during that brief period, it felt as though the ground itself was being torn apart. Buildings swayed and buckled, roads cracked and split, and chaos erupted all over the Bay Area. The epicenter was located in the Santa Cruz Mountains, near the small town of Loma Prieta, which is where the earthquake got its name. Though the epicenter was in a more rural area, the impact was felt far and wide. The city of San Francisco, along with surrounding towns like Oakland, Berkeley, and Santa Cruz, experienced some of the most severe damage. The earthquake was part of the larger complex system of faults beneath California, known as the San Andreas Fault Zone. The tremor was not just a violent shake, it was a reminder of the region's vulnerability to seismic activity. And despite the fact that California is known for its earthquakes, nothing could have prepared the Bay Area for the immense destruction that was about to unfold. In San Francisco, buildings that had withstood decades of earthquakes now buckled under the force of the tremor. Historic structures crumbled, and in some places, entire neighborhoods were wiped out in a matter of seconds. It wasn't just the buildings that suffered, the city's infrastructure was shattered. Power lines were downed, gas mains ruptured, and water systems were compromised. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming as people rushed to find safety, unaware of what was coming next. But the earthquake wasn't just a terrifying natural disaster, it was also a wake-up call. Many had known that the Bay Area was due for a major earthquake, but few could have predicted the sheer force and speed with which it hit. The suddenness of the event left emergency responders scrambling, and the vast scale of the destruction presented immense challenges for rescuers. For many, the reality of the earthquake's devastation didn't truly hit until hours later, when the extent of the damage became clear. As the dust began to settle and the ground stopped shaking, the people of the Bay Area were left to assess the damage. Buildings were reduced to rubble, roads were impassable, and communities were isolated. In some areas, the ground itself had shifted so violently that entire streets were cracked and lifted from their foundations. It was a stark reminder of the raw, uncontrollable force of nature. In the coming days, the toll of the Loma Prieta earthquake would be made clear. Over 60 people were confirmed dead, with thousands more injured. The destruction would continue to disrupt the region for weeks, if not months, as recovery and rebuilding efforts took hold. The emotional impact of the earthquake was profound, but so too was its effect on the physical landscape. San Francisco, Oakland, and other affected areas would face the difficult challenge of not just rebuilding, but learning from the experience. They would come to understand, more than ever before, how vital it was to be prepared for the unexpected. The Loma Prieta earthquake was a tragic event, but it also marked the beginning of a new era in earthquake awareness. It set in motion a series of changes in construction standards, emergency response protocols, and public safety campaigns. It became clear that no region, no matter how prepared, could ever truly be ready for the next big one. But with every lesson learned, the hope was that the devastation could be minimized and future generations could face earthquakes with a better understanding of what to do when disaster strikes. What made the Loma Prieta earthquake so memorable wasn't just its strength or the damage it caused, but how it changed the way we think about natural disasters. It would become one of the most important events in California's history, leaving an indelible mark on the people who lived through it and the generations that followed. As the tremors of the Loma Prieta earthquake faded away, a quiet panic began to set in. What had just happened? What was the extent of the damage? The chaos was overwhelming. In the moments following the earthquake, San Francisco and the surrounding Bay Area were thrown into disarray. People, disoriented and afraid, scrambled to make sense of the destruction around them. The sound of sirens filled the air as emergency responders rushed to help, but the scale of the disaster soon became evident. Rescue teams would soon find themselves working under nearly impossible conditions. The epicenter of the earthquake was located in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but the damage was felt as far away as Sacramento and parts of Southern California. The earthquake lasted only 15 seconds, but in those moments it caused immense destruction. It was a reminder of how quickly things can change and how unprepared even the most modern, well-established cities can be for the wrath of nature. The city of San Francisco, already a bustling metropolis, was now in a state of emergency. Major thoroughfares like the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge were affected. With transportation lines cut off, getting supplies into the city was impossible. The Bay Bridge, which connects San Francisco with Oakland, was severely damaged. The upper deck of the bridge collapsed onto the lower deck, creating a deadly mess of twisted steel and concrete. The bridge's collapse made it impossible for people to move between the cities, cutting off essential routes for rescue teams, emergency supplies, and medical aid. People who were stranded on the bridge had no choice but to wait for help. In neighborhoods close to the epicenter, the destruction was far worse. Buildings were reduced to rubble, leaving residents trapped under tons of debris. Entire city blocks were destroyed in a matter of seconds. Roads that were once smooth and easily navigable were cracked and displaced, making it nearly impossible for emergency vehicles to reach those in need of help. The damage wasn't just confined to buildings, it was the entire city's infrastructure that had taken a hit. Power outages blanketed the city, leaving thousands without electricity, which was crucial for medical facilities, hospitals, and rescue teams trying to save lives. Santa Cruz, a city about 30 miles south of the epicenter, was hit especially hard. The downtown area, which had been full of history and character, was now reduced to piles of rubble. One of the most iconic buildings in the city, the Pacific Garden Mall, had been partially destroyed. What had once been a bustling shopping center was now an eerie ghost of its former self, with walls collapsed and debris scattered across the streets. Local residents and business owners were now faced with the daunting task of figuring out how to survive in an area where nothing was safe. As night began to fall, the full extent of the damage became clearer. In addition to the collapsed buildings and broken bridges, fires broke out across the city. Gas lines that had been ruptured during the quake ignited, spreading flames quickly across neighborhoods. Firefighters, already overwhelmed with rescue operations, now had to contend with fires that seemed to multiply by the hour. The thick smoke from the flames made it difficult to see and breathe, creating even more chaos in an already chaotic situation. Meanwhile, search and rescue operations were launched in full force. Emergency crews worked around the clock, sifting through the debris in search of survivors. Time was of the essence, as each passing hour brought the risk of further casualties. Dogs were brought in to help locate people trapped under the wreckage. Rescue teams worked tirelessly, but the reality was grim. It was unclear how many people had been caught in the collapse of buildings, and the fear of aftershocks only added to the anxiety. As survivors were pulled from the wreckage, they were rushed to the few hospitals that were still operational. Medical staff worked tirelessly under intense pressure to treat the injured, but the conditions in the hospitals were far from ideal. Many were working without power or proper medical equipment, which further complicated their efforts. Across the Bay Area, stories of heroism began to emerge. Ordinary citizens stepped up in extraordinary ways, helping their neighbors and strangers alike. People who had never considered themselves heroes suddenly found themselves involved in life-saving efforts. These acts of kindness and bravery became a symbol of hope during the early days of the aftermath. For those who survived, the aftermath of the Loma Prieta earthquake was more than just physical damage. It was emotional trauma as well. Many had lost homes, businesses, and loved ones. The city of San Francisco, which had long prided itself on its resilience and strength, now had to confront its vulnerabilities. The destruction had not just fractured buildings, but also fractured the very sense of safety and security that people once took for granted. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that recovery would take years. The extent of the damage required a complete rebuilding of the city's infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and buildings. Emergency response teams worked day and night, but the task ahead seemed daunting. What made this disaster so unique was not only its destruction, but the way in which the people of the Bay Area would pull together to recover. Through the rubble and the smoke, there was a collective determination to rebuild, to survive, and to come back stronger than ever. The Loma Prieta earthquake may have left an indelible mark on the region, but it also ignited a fierce spirit of resilience that would carry the Bay Area through the hardest days of its recovery. The Loma Prieta earthquake on October 17, 1989, left an indelible mark on San Francisco and the surrounding Bay Area. While the initial shock was devastating, The ripple effects continued to unfold in the hours, days, and weeks that followed. What many did not realize at first was just how far-reaching the effects of this earthquake would be, not only on the physical landscape, but also on the social and economic fabric of the region. San Francisco, a city already known for its beauty, culture, and innovation, suddenly found itself grappling with the destruction of key infrastructure. The collapse of the Bay Bridge, a vital connection between San Francisco and Oakland, was a particularly crushing blow. The earthquake had caused the upper deck of the bridge to fall onto the lower deck, leaving a twisted mess of metal and concrete. Commuters who would typically rely on this busy route now found themselves stranded on either side of the bay. With this vital connection severed, the city was left to face a logistical nightmare, further exacerbating the struggle of getting emergency supplies and medical help into the area. Beyond the Bay Bridge, other major roadways and bridges suffered significant damage. The Oakland-San Francisco commute, which usually took a mere 15 to 20 minutes, now seemed impossible. The destruction of key transportation routes created a domino effect, further delaying the arrival of rescuers and supplies. The very heart of the Bay Area's transportation system had been disrupted, and its rebuilding would take years. As for the city itself, many of San Francisco's neighborhoods were unrecognizable after the quake. The devastation extended far beyond the immediate epicenter in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Downtown San Francisco, known for its iconic architecture and high-rise buildings, was not immune to the earthquake's destruction. Roads were cracked and uneven, forcing vehicles to maneuver slowly and carefully. Pedestrians walked cautiously as they navigated through the debris and wreckage that littered the streets. In the aftermath, large sections of the city were left without electricity, water, or gas, creating not only a logistical challenge, but also a public health crisis. Without power, hospitals were running on backup generators, and many businesses were forced to close, further exacerbating the city's economic hardships. The loss of life was tragic, with hundreds of residents injured or killed in the wake of the earthquake. However, the community's response was equally remarkable. In the days following the disaster, neighbors, friends, and complete strangers came together to support one another. Local businesses, many of which had been destroyed or severely damaged, began to reopen in makeshift locations to provide food, water, and medical supplies. Many residents joined forces to search for survivors in the rubble, risking their own safety to help others. It was this sense of unity in the face of crisis that helped the Bay Area slowly begin to heal. In addition to the immediate physical damage, the earthquake brought the issue of building codes and safety to the forefront. Many of the buildings that collapsed were older structures that hadn't been retrofitted to withstand a major seismic event. The Bay Area was no stranger to earthquakes, but the Loma Prieta quake served as a wake-up call. It became clear that stricter building codes were necessary to ensure that future earthquakes wouldn't lead to the same kind of destruction. This realization would lead to significant changes in construction standards and the way cities prepared for and responded to natural disasters. The collapse of historic buildings and neighborhoods left scars on the city's landscape, but it also brought about a renewed sense of purpose. San Francisco began to reimagine itself, not just as a city recovering from a disaster, but as a community committed to rebuilding stronger, more resilient infrastructure. The focus shifted to ensuring that future disasters would be met with preparation and resources capable of minimizing destruction. While San Francisco was undoubtedly impacted, the surrounding areas also faced their own set of challenges. Cities such as Oakland, San Jose, and Santa Cruz found themselves dealing with similar devastation, though on varying scales. Santa Cruz, located closer to the epicenter, had a particularly tough time recovering. The Pacific Garden Mall, one of the city's most beloved landmarks, was completely destroyed and entire blocks were left in ruins. Santa Cruz, a city that prided itself on its charming beachside atmosphere, now faced the monumental task of rebuilding from the ground up. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the emotional toll of the earthquake was just as significant as the physical damage. Residents were not only coping with the loss of homes and businesses, but they also struggled with the mental and emotional consequences of the disaster. The trauma of the event weighed heavily on the minds of those who had lived through it, particularly those who had lost loved ones, homes, or their livelihood. The sense of grief was compounded by the overwhelming task of rebuilding. Yet, despite these heavy burdens, a sense of hope emerged from the devastation. The Loma Prieta earthquake was a tragic reminder of the power of nature and the vulnerability of human infrastructure, but it also demonstrated the strength of the community and its ability to adapt and rebuild in the face of disaster. In the months and years following the earthquake, the Bay Area would become a symbol of resilience, showing the world what it meant to overcome devastation and emerge stronger. In the end, the Loma Prieta earthquake would have lasting consequences not only in the physical landscape of the Bay Area, but also in the ways that communities and governments approached disaster preparedness. It forced a reassessment of the region's infrastructure, encouraged new legislation on building safety, and provided a clear message to the world about the power of earthquakes. Though the scars of the earthquake would never fully fade, the legacy of recovery and rebuilding would shape the Bay Area for generations to come. The Loma Prieta earthquake of October 17, 1989, left its mark not only on the Bay Area, but on the entire nation. The immediate chaos, destruction, and loss of life were staggering, but the long-term effects of the earthquake were felt for years. As the dust settled and rescue operations concluded, the task of rebuilding began. However, this would prove to be an immensely challenging and costly endeavor, with lessons learned that would forever change how cities and communities approached disaster preparedness and recovery. In the months following the earthquake, the primary concern was the restoration of critical infrastructure. The collapse of the Bay Bridge had made it clear just how vulnerable cities were when faced with a large-scale disaster. Reconstruction efforts for this vital piece of infrastructure took several years, with the bridge eventually reopening in 2003. However, the rebuilding process involved much more than simply repairing what was broken. The Loma Prieta earthquake forced the Bay Area to rethink its entire approach to infrastructure and building safety. This earthquake served as a catalyst for widespread changes in building codes and seismic safety standards. Cities across California and the United States looked to the Bay Area as a case study for what could happen when buildings and bridges were not built with enough resilience to withstand a powerful quake. Following the disaster, construction codes were updated to make sure new buildings would be better equipped to handle seismic activity. Retrofitting older structures to meet these new standards became a priority. This shift in construction practices reflected a broader, more cautious approach to urban planning that took into account the inevitable risk posed by earthquakes in the region. Additionally, the event highlighted the importance of emergency preparedness and response systems. While the emergency responders did a remarkable job in the immediate aftermath, the massive scale of the destruction made it clear that resources needed to be better coordinated. A more unified approach to disaster relief was needed, with more advanced technology, systems, and protocols to ensure quicker responses in future emergencies. Local, state, and federal agencies would work together in the years that followed to strengthen these systems, and they implemented various programs to provide better support in the aftermath of a natural disaster. Perhaps one of the most significant changes following the Loma Prieta earthquake was the advancement in public awareness about the risks of earthquakes. Prior to the event, many people in California, particularly those in the Bay Area, had grown complacent, assuming that an earthquake of such magnitude was unlikely. The Loma Prieta earthquake shattered this false sense of security and became a stark reminder of the region's vulnerability. Educational campaigns were launched to inform the public about earthquake preparedness, emphasizing the importance of having emergency kits, knowing evacuation routes, and ensuring homes and buildings were as earthquake-resistant as possible. Another long-term consequence was the economic impact on the Bay Area. Many businesses, particularly small local establishments, faced devastating losses. Entire neighborhoods had to be rebuilt, and the cost of doing so was astronomical. The overall economic damage caused by the earthquake was estimated at over $6 billion, making it one of the costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. While insurance helped cover some of the costs, many residents and business owners were left struggling to rebuild their lives from the ground up. This financial burden would take years to overcome, and in some cases, families and businesses would never fully recover. For some residents, the emotional toll was just as severe. The trauma of surviving such a destructive event left deep psychological scars. Many of those who experienced the earthquake firsthand struggled with feelings of anxiety, loss, and grief in the months that followed. The mental health effects were widespread, particularly among those who lost family members, homes, or businesses. Local organizations worked tirelessly to provide counseling and support, but it was clear that the emotional recovery would take just as long, if not longer, than the physical rebuilding. Despite the immense challenges, the response to the Loma Prieta earthquake also demonstrated the strength and resilience of the Bay Area's communities. Volunteers from across the nation came to offer their help, with people from all walks of life working together to support those affected. Communities that had been torn apart by the earthquake slowly began to rebuild, and residents took pride in their ability to persevere. The earthquake, while devastating, became a symbol of the human spirit's ability to recover in the face of catastrophe. As time passed, the Loma Prieta earthquake would also have an impact on how future natural disasters were handled. The lessons learned from this event that would influence how cities across the world prepared for earthquakes and other natural disasters. Emergency management strategies were refined, and a greater emphasis was placed on building stronger, more resilient communities. The final legacy of the Loma Prieta earthquake is perhaps best encapsulated by the changes it brought to California's approach to disaster response and infrastructure development. The disaster was a wake-up call that pushed the region and the world to rethink how we build, how we prepare, and how we recover from natural disasters. Today, thanks to the lessons learned during that fateful October day, the Bay Area is stronger, more resilient, and better equipped to face the next inevitable earthquake. The Loma Prieta earthquake remains a defining moment in American history, not just for the destruction it caused, but for the lessons it taught us about the fragility of human-made structures and the power of nature. While the scars of the disaster still remain, they serve as a constant reminder of our vulnerability, our strength, and our ability to rebuild in the face of adversity. The resilience of the Bay Area and the nation as a whole was tested in the aftermath of the Loma Prieta earthquake, and the lessons learned continue to shape how we prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. It all began on January 7th, 2025. Southern California had been dealing with an unusually dry stretch, but that morning, everything shifted. Powerful Santa Ana winds swept through Los Angeles and San Diego counties, kicking off what would become one of the most destructive wildfire events in California's history. By the end of the month, 14 separate fires had burned across the region. These fires weren't just big, they were fast, hot, and impossible to control in some areas. Firefighters were up against wind gusts that reached 100 miles per hour in some spots. That's hurricane-level strength. The winds didn't just spread the fires, they tore down power lines, knocked over trees, and made it nearly impossible for ground crews to get close. On top of that, humidity levels dropped dangerously low, turning the region into a tinderbox. The conditions weren't exactly a surprise. Just a few days before the fires started, the National Weather Service had issued red flag warnings. Those warnings said it could be a particularly dangerous situation, especially in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Forecast models were already calling for extremely critical fire weather, and those predictions turned out to be right on target. One of the first signs of trouble came earlier than most people realize. On January 1st, a small fire called the Loma Fire broke out. It didn't do much damage, it burned only 8 acres, but it started in the exact area where the much larger Palisades fire would begin days later. That small fire was an early red flag, and it turns out it was a warning of what was coming. By January 3rd, the Storm Prediction Center was already forecasting an extremely critical fire risk for January 8th. These warnings don't come lightly. That same week, they began marking nearly every day in mid-January with at least a critical fire risk. From January 7th to 15th, Southern California had almost no break in fire danger, and that was just the beginning. By January 8th, the worst fears had started to come true. Fires were breaking out all across the southern part of the state. The two biggest fires, the Eaton Fire in Altadena and the Palisades Fire in Pacific Palisades, were already showing signs of becoming major disasters. Fueled by bone-dry vegetation, low humidity, and those intense Santa Ana winds, the flames moved faster than anyone expected. This wasn't just bad luck, it was the result of a perfect storm created over months, even years. Back in the winter before, California had experienced a period of unusually heavy rain. That led to a burst of plant growth all over the region. Grasses, shrubs, and other vegetation flourished. But then everything dried out. That green growth became kindling. Scientists later confirmed that climate change had played a huge role. According to researchers at the University of California, temperatures in 2024 had been unusually hot. Just the difference between the 2024 heat and the average temperatures since the 1980s accounted for 25% of the moisture loss that fueled the wildfires. and that estimate was considered conservative. Another analysis showed that the area was now up to 5 degrees Celsius hotter, up to 15% drier, and up to 20% windier compared to the mid-20th century. That combination made wildfires far more likely and far more dangerous, and because climate change has made California's wildfire season longer, it now overlaps with Santa Ana wind season. That overlap is exactly what happened here. The fires kept spreading. People had to move fast. Over 200,000 residents were evacuated across the region. Homes, neighborhoods, and entire hillsides were swallowed by flames. And tragically, at least 30 people lost their lives during the disaster. One of the hardest hit areas was Malibu's Carbon Beach, also known as Billionaires Beach. Some of the richest people in California lost their homes in a matter of hours. Fires don't care how big or expensive a house is. When the wind is blowing that hard and the vegetation is that dry, there's not much anyone can do to stop it. By the end of the month, the wildfires had burned more than 57,000 acres and destroyed over 18,000 homes and structures. The total damage was estimated between $250 and $275 billion. That made the Eaton and Palisades fires likely the second and third most destructive fires in California history. Fire departments from all over the state responded. Cal Fire, along with local crews, worked around the clock. Tactical aircraft dropped fire retardant from above, while ground teams battled the flames directly. Still, it took until January 31st to fully contain the two largest fires. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, the city's fire department was already under pressure. Their budget had been cut by over $17 million just a few months earlier. That meant fewer hours for training, less brush inspection, and less equipment available. Even though they later received some added funding, that early budget cut made it harder to prepare for a disaster like this. To make things worse, fire departments all across the country were dealing with long delays in getting new vehicles. Prices had gone up, and supply chain issues meant departments were waiting months or even years for new trucks. All of this combined made firefighting efforts during these wildfires even more difficult. Another major problem was how older neighborhoods were built. Fire scientists pointed out that in places like the Palisades, most of the homes had been built in the 1950s and 60s. Back then, there weren't strict rules about fire-resistant materials, so you had wood frame houses, thick vegetation, and homes built close together, basically the perfect recipe for one house fire to spread to the next. In newer neighborhoods, California has building codes that require homes in fire zones to be made with materials that are less likely to burn. But those rules don't apply to homes built before the codes were put in place. That's one of the reasons why the fires spread so fast in certain areas. The electric grid also played a role. Some experts said the grid in Los Angeles was only designed to handle wind speeds up to 56 miles per hour. That's way below what actually happened. In some places, gusts hit 100 miles per hour. Utility companies didn't have a system to shut off power in high-risk urban areas, which might have prevented some fires from starting when power lines fell. And then there's the issue of homelessness. According to past reports, more than half of the fires the Los Angeles Fire Department responds to are connected to homeless encampments. It's not always intentional. Many start from cooking or trying to stay warm, but in dry conditions like these, a single spark near a tent can become a wildfire. Despite everything, local organizations stepped in to help. Groups like the Michael Spicen Found Animals Foundation and the Better Neighbor Project started collecting donations and helping families who had lost their homes. It was a reminder that in the face of disaster, people still come together. By the time the fires were fully contained at the end of January, Southern California had been through one of its toughest months in recent memory. 14 wildfires had swept through neighborhoods, hillsides, and forests. Over 57,000 acres had burned. More than 18,000 homes and buildings were gone, and over 200,000 people had been forced to leave everything behind. The fires showed just how much the climate has changed. From strong rains that create more fuel to longer dry seasons and higher temperatures, every part of the environment now seems primed for wildfires. Scientists have warned that these events aren't going to be rare anymore. In fact, they're becoming the new normal. Wind speeds are getting more intense. Vegetation is growing faster than drying out quicker. Controlled burns, which help reduce fuel, are harder to schedule because there are fewer safe days to do them. And even though we have more advanced tools and forecasts than ever, fires like these move so fast, even the best teams struggle to keep up. The January 2025 wildfires were a wake-up call. A reminder that big disasters don't always start with explosions or earthquakes. Sometimes it's just one spark, a gust of wind, and a hillside covered in dry brush. And when all those things come together, the results can be devastating. As California continues to recover, the questions remain. How do we adapt? How do we build smarter? And how do we prepare for what's clearly becoming a longer, more dangerous fire season? Only time will tell, but for now, one thing is clear. This wasn't just another fire season. This was a warning. In the early 20th century, San Francisco was a city in the throes of rapid expansion, a bustling hub of innovation and ambition on the western edge of the United States. Located on a narrow peninsula bordered by the Pacific Ocean and San Francisco Bay, the city's scenic views and booming economy made it one of the most desirable places to live and work. Its population was growing rapidly, and so were the skyscrapers, streetcar lines, and intricate neighborhoods that sprawled through the city's famously hilly landscape. San Francisco was coming into its own as a modern metropolis, establishing itself as a key gateway for trade and immigration. But as the city evolved, so did its risks. San Francisco was not only a marvel of urban growth, but also uniquely vulnerable to natural disasters due to its location along the San Andreas Fault. This geological fault line, which runs almost the entire length of California, marks a boundary where the Pacific and North American tectonic plates meet. In many ways, the city's very existence on this fault line was a ticking clock for disaster, one that only a few experts truly understood or worried about at the time. Despite these hidden risks, the city's expansion was largely unregulated. Construction was happening at breakneck speed, but building standards and safety regulations were lacking. With little oversight, contractors often cut corners, opting for cheaper, less durable materials. The city's infrastructure was also relatively fragile. San Francisco's water supply system, for instance, was outdated and poorly equipped for a growing city, let alone a major disaster. In fact, San Francisco had already experienced smaller earthquakes in the past, but these minor tremors were largely ignored or forgotten in the enthusiasm of the city's golden era. Throughout the years leading up to the quake, there were occasional reminders of the city's vulnerability. Some geologists and city planners had raised concerns about the need for better earthquake preparedness. Still, few believed that such a disaster could hit in their lifetimes, and even fewer had ever considered the potential scale of devastation that could unfold. As San Francisco continued to grow, the booming neighborhoods and thriving downtown districts became ever more crowded. The lack of formal building codes meant that many structures were vulnerable to even moderate earthquakes, let alone the powerful shockwave waiting beneath the Earth's surface. In residential areas, buildings were tightly packed, and construction materials varied in quality, creating the perfect conditions for fire to spread should an accident occur. What no one realized, though, was that the city was on the brink of one of the most devastating urban disasters in American history. In the pre-dawn hours of April 18, 1906, San Francisco lay quiet under a still dark sky. At precisely 5:12 in the morning, this calm was shattered as a powerful earthquake struck the city, radiating shockwaves across the region with a force that no one had anticipated. This wasn't a minor tremor, but a colossal quake that would measure an estimated magnitude of 7.9, shaking the ground so violently that entire buildings shifted and cracked within seconds. People were jolted awake by the tremors, some thrown from their beds, while others scrambled to escape from their crumbling homes. The quake's epicenter lay offshore, just 2 miles west of San Francisco, along the infamous San Andreas Fault. The seismic waves radiated quickly, creating destruction not only within San Francisco, but throughout the surrounding areas, including coastal towns and nearby cities like Santa Rosa and San Jose. The quake's intensity was so strong that it was felt as far north as Oregon and as far south as Los Angeles. The first moments were sheer chaos as buildings, especially those constructed without solid foundations or quality materials, began to collapse around the city. Entire neighborhoods crumbled, and within seconds, thousands of people were trapped or injured as walls buckled and roofs fell. The shaking lasted less than a minute, but the destruction it left was astonishing. The city's famous brick buildings and ornate Victorian homes, many of which were built without structural reinforcement, proved particularly vulnerable, collapsing in heaps or leaning at precarious angles. For many who survived the initial quake, the nightmare was only beginning. Gas lines ruptured throughout the city, igniting fires that would soon turn out to be as catastrophic as the earthquake itself. While the earth had quieted, the sounds of destruction persisted. With the snapping of power lines, the crashing of broken glass, and the cries of frightened residents filling the air. The city's infrastructure had also taken a heavy blow. Major streets were buckled and torn open with deep cracks that made movement nearly impossible in some areas. The cable car tracks that connected neighborhoods across the city were ripped from the ground, and the central water mains were badly damaged. This loss of water pressure would soon prove disastrous, as firefighters scrambled to combat the flames now erupting across the city. San Francisco's citizens were in a state of shock, and their first instinct was to flee to any open space they could find. Many people rushed to parks like Golden Gate Park and the Presidio, seeking refuge from the collapsing buildings and the fires spreading through the city. At the same time, the emergency response teams and firefighters faced an unprecedented challenge with limited resources, broken communication lines, and no access to water in several districts. The scale of the quake's destruction was unlike anything San Francisco had ever faced, and it would take days to grasp the full extent of the damage. But as the fires continued to grow, the city's residents and officials realized that the earthquake itself had only been the beginning of a much larger catastrophe, and in the days following the earthquake, San Francisco became a city transformed. Fires raged across the city for nearly 3 days, consuming entire neighborhoods and leaving blocks upon blocks of once bustling streets in smoldering ruin. By the time the flames finally died down, an estimated 500 city blocks had been reduced to ash. Over 28,000 buildings were completely destroyed, including landmark structures, homes, and businesses that define the city's identity. The famous City Hall, an architectural marvel completed just a few years before, was left as a mere shell, reduced to rubble by the quake and fire alike. For the tens of thousands left homeless, the situation was dire. Nearly half of San Francisco's population of about 400,000 people were displaced. Makeshift camps sprang up in public parks like Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, and even along the beaches. The U.S. Army, stationed at the Presidio, took immediate action, setting up tents, distributing food, and providing medical care to those in need. Across the city, citizens formed small relief groups, banding together to share what little resources they had and helping each other rebuild what was left. The destruction of infrastructure was catastrophic. Roads, railways, and telegraph lines that connected San Francisco to the outside world were severed, making communication and supply delivery difficult. Relief efforts faced major delays as supplies struggled to make their way through damaged routes. Yet within days, aid from nearby cities, and eventually from across the country, poured in to help the city recover. The spirit of resilience among San Francisco's residents shone brightly as people gathered to clear debris, rescue survivors, and rebuild their lives. The events of April 19th revealed serious weaknesses in San Francisco's city planning and infrastructure. The fires, which accounted for nearly 80% of the destruction, exposed the inadequacies in the city's water system and the lack of fire-resistant building materials. Officials and city planners took these lessons seriously. In the years that followed, new building codes were enforced, focusing on structural integrity and fire resistance, ensuring that future buildings could better withstand such catastrophes. Additionally, new water systems and hydrants were installed across the city to allow for rapid fire suppression, even in the event of a severe earthquake. The impact of the disaster extended far beyond the physical rebuilding of San Francisco. The event prompted nationwide conversations about earthquake preparedness and safety regulations. Other cities built along fault lines, particularly those on the West Coast, began to rethink their own construction practices and emergency plans, recognizing that a similar disaster could strike them as well. This earthquake led to advancements in seismic research, eventually laying the groundwork for what would become modern earthquake engineering and safety standards. As San Francisco slowly rose from the ashes, it emerged as a symbol of resilience and rebirth. While much of its historic architecture had been lost, the rebuilding efforts transformed it into a stronger, safer city. By 1915, less than a decade later, the city was ready to host the Panama Pacific International Exposition, showcasing its recovery and the new San Francisco to the world. The scars left by the earthquake and fires served as a reminder of the city's vulnerability, but also of its unbreakable spirit. Today, the legacy of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake lives on, both in the city's architecture and in the safety protocols it inspired. It was a defining moment that reshaped San Francisco, preparing it to face future challenges, while honoring the resilience of those who endured one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history. California is no stranger to wildfires. For decades, the state has battled these devastating blazes, but in recent years, the frequency and intensity of the wildfires have reached terrifying new levels. Wildfires are now a regular part of life in California, and the danger continues to grow. In fact, some of the worst fires in California's history have occurred just in the past few years. And it's not just the scale of the fires that's concerning, it's the fact that they seem to be getting worse, faster, and more unpredictable. Wildfires have always been a part of California's natural landscape, but the fires of today are different. The combination of extreme heat, persistent drought conditions, and changing weather patterns has created a perfect storm for these wildfires to spread uncontrollably. In 2023 alone, thousands of acres of land burned across the state, causing widespread damage and destruction. It's a growing crisis that's forcing entire communities to evacuate and is leaving families to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Let's break down some of the staggering numbers. In recent years, the state has experienced some of the largest wildfires in its history. Just in 2018, the Camp Fire alone destroyed over 14,000 homes and claimed the lives of 85 people. It was the deadliest wildfire in California's history. Then in 2020, the August Complex Fire became the largest wildfire the state had ever seen, burning over 1 million acres of land. Entire towns were leveled, and the devastation was unlike anything we had seen before. The immediate destruction caused by these fires is overwhelming, but the long-term effects are just as alarming. Not only are these fires taking a massive toll on human life and property, but they're also severely impacting California's environment. Wildfires destroy thousands of acres of forests, habitats, and natural landscapes. With millions of acres of land already scorched, the question is, how much more will burn before we see change? But the problem doesn't end with the destruction of the land. The economic cost is also staggering. Wildfires in California have caused billions of dollars in damages, far more than most people realize. From agricultural losses to businesses forced to close, the financial impact ripples through the economy in ways that aren't immediately visible. The losses affect entire industries, from the wine-growing regions in Napa Valley to small towns in the foothills. And let's not forget the cost of rebuilding, which can take years or even decades, with communities often facing months or years without proper housing. While the numbers are staggering, it's essential to remember that wildfires don't just impact the environment or the economy, they impact real people. These fires change lives in ways that can never be fully measured. Families lose homes, loved ones, and entire communities are uprooted. Survivors are left dealing with the emotional and psychological trauma of having their lives turned upside down. The impact on mental health is profound, and it can last long after the flames have been extinguished. The fear of the unknown, the anxiety of evacuation, and the devastation of loss weigh heavily on those who experience it. As we look at this growing crisis, it's clear that California's wildfire epidemic is not just a seasonal issue. It's a part of a much larger and more complex set of challenges. The fires of today are linked to the changing climate, poor land management practices, and our own human activities. Each fire is a warning sign that we need to take action. The question is, how do we respond before it's too late? As we continue, we'll take a deeper look into what exactly is driving the spread of these fires, and what factors are making California's wildfires worse than ever before. Stay tuned to learn more about the causes behind this devastating crisis. The causes of California's wildfire epidemic are multifaceted, and understanding what's behind the intensity and frequency of these fires is crucial if we are to have any hope of controlling them. While wildfires have always been a natural part of California's landscape, several key factors are making these fires more dangerous and harder to fight. One of the primary drivers of this crisis is climate change. As the Earth's temperatures continue to rise, California is experiencing longer, hotter summers and more intense heat waves. Over the past few decades, temperatures have steadily increased, leading to conditions where wildfires can thrive. The combination of higher temperatures and drier weather means that forests and grasslands are more prone to ignition. California's climate is naturally dry in many regions, but with climate change accelerating these conditions, fire seasons are starting earlier and lasting longer. Rising temperatures also contribute to the drying out of vegetation, creating more fuel for wildfires to feed on. This year, for example, California saw record-breaking temperatures in some areas, pushing the limits of the state's fire management strategies. The hotter it gets, the faster the fires spread, with flames consuming everything in their path. Another significant factor is the changing precipitation patterns. California has long been affected by droughts, but these conditions are becoming more severe. Droughts dry up rivers, lakes, and water supplies, and they also dehydrate plants, making them more susceptible to fire. The state has experienced extreme drought years in the past, but in recent years, these droughts have been more intense and longer lasting. Climate change has disrupted the natural water cycle, making it harder to predict when these dry spells will end, leaving California's landscapes more vulnerable to fire. But it's not just the weather. Poor forest management practices have also contributed to the severity of these fires. In the past, controlled burns and other fire management practices helped to clear dry vegetation and prevent catastrophic fires. However, these practices have not been consistently implemented over the years. As a result, forests have become overgrown with vegetation, creating more fuel for fires to spread rapidly. The dense underbrush and dead trees in California's forests have created a perfect environment for massive fires to take hold and become uncontrollable. Another significant factor is human activity. While many wildfires are sparked by natural causes like lightning strikes, a large portion of California's wildfires can be traced back to human actions. In recent years, careless behavior has caused several deadly blazes. For instance, campfires that aren't fully extinguished, discarded cigarettes, or even sparks from vehicles on dry roads have started fires that quickly spiraled out of control. Arson is also a growing problem, with individuals intentionally setting fires for a variety of reasons, sometimes out of malice or for financial gain. These intentional fires are often the hardest to contain and can lead to widespread destruction, as seen in the past with large-scale fires like the Thomas Fire in 2017 and the Kincaid Fire in 2019. The combination of drought, overgrown forests, extreme temperatures, and human activities has created a volatile situation. Each of these factors on its own is concerning, but when they all come together, the results can be catastrophic. Add in the fact that California's population continues to grow, and more people are living in high-risk fire zones, and it's clear that this crisis is not going to get better without significant changes in policy, fire management, and our collective behavior. What's even more alarming is that we are seeing wildfires spread more quickly and more destructively than ever before. The fires of recent years have torn through entire towns, leaving communities with little warning to evacuate. The Butte Fire in 2015 and the Camp Fire in 2018 both highlighted how fast and unpredictable these fires can be. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped off the map, and people have had to abandon their homes and their lives in the face of this growing inferno. In some cases, these fires have moved so quickly that people only had minutes to escape. With no time to grab personal belongings or say goodbye to their homes, the damage caused by these fires is beyond just the immediate destruction. Wildfires release huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, worsening global warming and creating a vicious cycle. The destruction of natural habitats also disrupts ecosystems, forcing animals to flee and sometimes leaving them without food or shelter. This ecological damage can take years or even decades to recover, with some species losing critical habitats forever. In the next part, we will take a closer look at some of the most devastating fires in recent history and the aftermath they left behind. These stories highlight the urgency of addressing the wildfire crisis and the profound impact it has on individuals, families, and entire communities. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the aftermath of California's raging fires. As the fires rage across California, it's not just the flames that leave lasting damage, it's the aftermath. The toll of these wildfires on people's lives, the economy, and the environment is immense and often irreversible. While the flames themselves are terrifying, the emotional and long-term consequences of losing homes, loved ones, and communities can be just as devastating. One of the most striking consequences of California's wildfire crisis is the human impact. Thousands of families have been displaced with no place to call home. When fires like the Camp Fire in 2018 hit, entire neighborhoods were destroyed. For the people of Paradise, California, the devastation was particularly heartbreaking. The Camp Fire was the deadliest wildfire in the state's history, claiming the lives of 85 people and reducing the town of Paradise to rubble. The survivors were left not only with the loss of their homes, but also the loss of their community and support systems. In the immediate aftermath of such catastrophic events, people are forced to leave behind their memories, their homes, and their lives as they knew them. The psychological toll of losing everything in a fire is staggering. The trauma of evacuation, the uncertainty of what the future holds, and the constant fear of more fires create a psychological burden that lingers long after the flames are out. The process of rebuilding isn't just about physical structures. It's about repairing the emotional wounds of people who've lost everything. Moreover, the economic impact of these wildfires is crushing. In addition to the physical destruction of homes and businesses, wildfires also disrupt entire industries, costing billions of dollars in damages. Agriculture, which is a key part of California's economy, is particularly vulnerable. Fires destroy crops, disrupt the harvest season, and damage irrigation systems, leading to massive financial losses. In the wine country of Napa Valley, for example, fires like the Tubbs. Fire in 2017 not only destroyed homes, but also devastated vineyards, causing long-term financial damage to the region. Businesses in affected areas face steep challenges in recovering. Many are forced to close their doors permanently, while others struggle to reopen, burdened with costly repairs, lost customers, and ongoing health and safety risks. With fires becoming more frequent and severe, it's increasingly difficult for communities to recover fully. The damage is not only financial, but also emotional, as people are forced to leave behind the places they've built their lives. The environmental consequences of wildfires are just as severe. When wildfires burn, they do more than destroy homes and infrastructure. They also damage ecosystems that may never fully recover. Wildfires release large amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which contributes to global warming. In fact, in some extreme cases, a single wildfire can produce more carbon emissions than an entire country's annual output. The wildfire season is now a major contributor to California's carbon footprint, exacerbating the very climate conditions that fueled the fire in the first place. Furthermore, wildfires have a profound effect on local wildlife. As fires tear through forests and grasslands, they destroy animal habitats, displacing or killing countless creatures. The Sierra Nevada region, home to rare species like the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, is particularly vulnerable. These animals rely on the forests for shelter, food, and breeding grounds. When their habitats are destroyed by fires, their survival is put at risk. Some species may be pushed to the brink of extinction as their natural homes disappear. The loss of vegetation and trees also leads to soil erosion, which can further damage the landscape. Without trees to anchor the soil, the ground becomes loose and more prone to erosion. Especially after rain, this can lead to devastating mudslides, which can flood already vulnerable areas, making recovery even harder. The fire-ravaged hills of California are at particular risk, as fire scars create conditions where heavy rains can lead to mud flows that destroy homes, roads, and vital infrastructure. Water quality is also threatened by wildfires. As fire destroys the land, the ash and debris flow into rivers and streams, contaminating water supplies. This can affect everything from drinking water to agricultural irrigation. The long-term environmental damage caused by these fires can take years to reverse, and some areas may never fully recover. Wildfires also disrupt wildlife migration and force animals to flee to other areas, putting pressure on ecosystems that are already under strain. These environmental impacts are not just immediate, they affect California's future. As wildfires become more frequent, it's clear that the state's ecosystems will continue to bear the brunt of the destruction. Rebuilding these areas, both ecologically and economically, will be a long and difficult process. Next, we will explore the efforts being made to tackle California's wildfire crisis. From firefighting strategies to climate policy, we'll take a closer look at the steps being taken to address this urgent issue. California's wildfire crisis is an urgent challenge, but it's not without efforts to fight back. While the fires continue to ravage communities, resources and strategies are being deployed to reduce the frequency, severity, and damage of these catastrophic events. The problem is complex, but there are critical steps being taken to address the situation from multiple angles, including fire prevention, firefighting, and long-term policy changes. One major area of focus is fire prevention. In the past, California's fire strategy primarily focused on firefighting efforts once fires had already started. However, experts have increasingly emphasized the importance of preventing fires before they spread out of control. Controlled burns, or prescribed burns, are one of the most effective tools in reducing wildfire risk. These burns are intentionally set under controlled conditions to reduce the amount of fuel, such as dry brush, that could contribute to a larger, more dangerous fire. Although controlled burns have been used for centuries, their implementation has been inconsistent, and many experts argue that more extensive and frequent use of this technique is crucial. Alongside this, forest management practices have been reevaluated. California's forests have suffered from decades of neglect and poor management, leading to overgrown trees, dead vegetation, and dry conditions. By thinning out dense forests, removing dead trees, and restoring healthy ecosystems, the risk of large uncontrollable fires can be reduced. In recent years, both the state and federal governments have begun investing in forest restoration projects, but much more needs to be done to manage the millions of acres of land that are at risk. A critical aspect of California's wildfire response is the firefighting efforts. The state has a robust network of firefighters, both professional and volunteer, who fight fires on the front lines. However, the increasing intensity and frequency of fires in recent years has stretched these resources to the limit. In response, California has been increasing its investment in firefighting technology, from aerial firefighting units such as helicopters and planes to more advanced fire suppression systems. These air resources can drop water or fire retardant to slow the fire's spread and give ground crews more time to control the flames. Additionally, California has also sought to improve its firefighting coordination. Wildfires don't respect state lines, and in many cases, fires have spread across counties and even into neighboring states. By improving communication and collaboration between local, state, and federal agencies, response times can be faster and more resources can be allocated to areas in desperate need. This coordination extends to mutual aid agreements, which allow fire departments from different areas to assist each other during major disasters. Technology has become a vital tool in California's battle against wildfires. Innovations like drones, satellite imagery, and artificial intelligence have been used to detect fires early, monitor fire behavior, and predict how fires will spread. The use of real-time data helps firefighters make better decisions on where to focus their efforts and how to protect lives and property. In particular, early warning systems have been improved, allowing residents to receive evacuation notices and alerts sooner. The state has also invested in fire mapping tools to predict where fires are most likely to strike, based on weather patterns, land conditions, and past fire history. Climate change mitigation also plays a major role in California's efforts to curb the wildfire crisis. As we've seen, rising temperatures, prolonged droughts, and changing weather patterns have created the perfect conditions for wildfires. To combat this, the state has made significant strides toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions and transitioning to renewable energy sources. California's climate change policies include goals to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and increase the use of clean energy across the state. By addressing the root cause of changing weather conditions, California aims to reduce the frequency of extreme conditions that contribute to wildfires. Community preparedness is another key component of the state's strategy. California has ramped up efforts to educate the public about fire safety, evacuation plans, and the importance of creating defensible spaces around homes. Fire-resistant materials and building codes are also being updated to ensure new construction is more resilient to fires. In some areas, fire-resistant landscaping and the clearing of dead vegetation around properties are now mandatory to reduce the risk of fires spreading to homes. Despite all of these efforts, it's clear that California cannot solve this crisis overnight. Long-term recovery and preparation are essential. Rebuilding communities after fires is a lengthy process, and there's still much work to do in terms of restoring habitats, ecosystems, and the mental well-being of those who've lost so much. Moreover, the constant threat of future wildfires looms large. California must remain vigilant, adaptive, and proactive in its approach. However, there is hope. Communities in fire-ravaged areas are coming together to rebuild, stronger than before. There's a growing recognition that while wildfires will continue to be a part of California's landscape, we can reduce their impact and ultimately learn to live with them. By combining fire prevention, smarter forest management, improved firefighting efforts, climate change mitigation, and community preparedness, California can move toward a safer, more resilient future. This crisis is a reminder of how fragile our environment is and how important it is to take action. The wildfires of the last few years have shown us the devastating effects of climate change and poor management, but they've also highlighted the incredible strength and resilience of the people of California. The battle against wildfires is ongoing, but with continued effort and innovation, there is hope for a future where California's wildfires become less destructive and the communities they threaten can thrive once again. Thanks for watching. Let's continue this conversation. If you have thoughts on California's wildfire crisis, Feel free to share them in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more discussions on environmental challenges and their impacts on our world.